The forest above Ashwood Hollow had stood undisturbed for 400 years, and on the night the sky tore open above it, not a single animal made a sound. No owls called. No wolves answered them. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as a streak of blue-white fire cut across the Montana sky and buried itself somewhere past Cutter's Ridge, in the deep black timber where no logging road had ever reached. In the town below, 26-year-old Maren Colton was standing on her porch with a mug of coffee going cold in her hands, watching the light fade over the mountains, when the sky lit up like the world's largest camera flash. She flinched, spilled coffee down her wrist, and swore under her breath. "Did you see that?" her neighbor shouted from across the fence. "Meteor," Maren called back, though even as she said it, something in her gut told her it wasn't. She was wrong. It was not a meteor. It was a ship, and aboard it was a creature the Kael'Vahn called a Scarth, a bladeworthy, a hunter of the Ninth Circuit, 7 feet of corded muscle wrapped in armor grown from the exoskeletons of things Earth had no name for. His true name, in the clicking, layered language of his people, would take a human throat several tries and several bruised vocal cords to pronounce. He answered, when he answered at all, to Vahnrik. He had come to Earth the way his kind had come to 100 worlds before it, not to conquer, not to colonize, but to judge. The Kael'Vahn did not hunt the weak. They hunted the deserving. Every world they touched down on had its monsters, the poachers who slaughtered for pleasure, the men who preyed on those smaller than themselves, the quiet cruelties that walked upright and smiled at their neighbors. Vahnrik's people believed, with the absolute, unshakable certainty of a species that had never been proven wrong, that such creatures existed to be culled, and that the ones who did the culling earned the right to call themselves worthy. Ashwood Hollow, it turned out, had monsters of its own. For 3 weeks the disappearances were dismissed as the wilderness doing what wilderness does. A drifter here, a hiker there, then Cole Renner, who ran illegal traps up past the ridge and had once left a bear cub to die slowly in a snare because the pelt wasn't worth the bullet, vanished from his own cabin, the door still locked from the inside. Then it was the Halverson brothers, who ran something out of their barn that the sheriff had quietly decided not to look into too closely, until they too stopped answering their phones, and their barn was found with 3 of its walls painted in something that used to be blood. And then it was Daniel Colton. Maren's older brother had always run with a rough crowd. She knew that, had known it for years, had spent a decade making excuses for him at Thanksgiving dinners while their mother pretended not to notice the track marks and the men who came around at odd hours. What she didn't know, what she would only learn weeks later in the worst way possible, was that Daniel and the Halversons had spent the better part of 2 years running a poaching operation that reached far past deer and elk, wolves, golden eagles, a black bear sow with 2 cubs, shot from a truck window for a client in another state willing to pay 6 figures for the head. Daniel hadn't pulled every trigger, but he'd driven the truck. He'd known. He was found, what was left of him, hanging from the rafters of the old grain silo on the Colton family's back 40, arranged with a precision that made even the state troopers go pale and quiet. Vahnrik did not kill for spectacle. He killed for meaning. Every body he left behind was a message written in a language older than words. This one was weighed and found deserving. Maren didn't see it that way. Maren saw her brother, infuriating, self-destructive, but still her brother, still the boy who'd taught her to ride a bike and covered for her when she snuck out at 16, strung up like something butchered. She decided, standing in that silo with the smell of copper and old hay thick in her throat, that she was going to find whatever had done this, and she was going to kill it. Maren had 2 things going for her that most of Ashwood Hollow's other would-be Avengers didn't. She was a wildlife biologist who had spent 6 seasons tracking cougars through terrain just like Cutter's Ridge, and she was too stubborn to know when to stop. She started with the pattern. Every kill site sat within a rough 3-mile radius of a single point on the ridge, a place the old topographic maps didn't even bother naming. She started with the wounds too, though she wished she hadn't. Whatever left those marks did not use a knife or a gun or any weapon Maren's training had a category for. And she started with the silence. The fact that for 2 weeks after Daniel's death, absolutely nothing happened, as if the thing in the woods was waiting to see what she would do. It was watching her. She knew that on some animal, hindbrain level, long before she ever caught a flicker of movement in the tree line that shouldn't have been there. A bending of light, like heat rising off summer asphalt, wrapped around a shape too broad and too tall to be any bear. The first time Vahnrik let her see him, truly see him, decloaked, arms loose at his sides in a posture his people used only for the worthy, Maren was kneeling over a fresh trail marker with her rifle slung uselessly across her back, and she looked up into a face built from nightmares, and did not run. That, more than anything, was what interested him. His people had a word, untranslatable really, but the closest a human throat could manage was something like Threxus, for prey that stood its ground. It was the highest compliment a Kael'Vahn hunter could pay, and it was not a compliment Vahnrik had expected to find himself paying. To a creature so small, so soft-skinned, so obviously breakable. He did not kill her that day. He told himself it was because she was not deserving. She had not raised a hand against anything weaker than herself, had spent her whole short life protecting things, which was a category of creature his people rarely encountered and had no ready answer for. That was the reason he gave himself. It would take him much longer to admit it wasn't the only one. Weeks became a strange, wary dance. Maren tracked him. He let himself be tracked only exactly as much as he chose to. Twice he saved her life without her fully understanding it. Once from a rock slide he could have simply let happen. Once from a very ordinary, very human man with a very ordinary, very human gun, who had been the reason for 2 of the earlier disappearances and who made the mistake of deciding Maren looked like an easier target than his usual prey. Vahnrik removed the man's head so quickly that Maren, sprinting through underbrush with her heart in her throat, didn't understand what had happened until she saw what was left. She should have been more afraid of him after that. Instead, something small and reluctant in her chest loosened, just slightly. "You didn't have to do that," she told him, 3 nights later, when she found the courage to speak instead of simply watching him watch her from the tree line. "He was not deserving of you," Vahnrik said, "or something close to it." His translator, cobbled together from months of listening to human radio chatter and the low murmur of Ashwood Hollow's diner, rendered his clicks and growls into blunt, formal English that made him sound like he was reading from a manual. "Few here are. My brother wasn't deserving either. That what you think?" The silence that followed told her everything the translator couldn't. "Tell me," she said, and her voice cracked on the second word, and she hated herself for it. And Vahnrik, who had ended 100 lives across a dozen worlds without a flicker of hesitation, found that he could not make himself say it plainly. He showed her instead. His armor carried recordings, the way his people always carried proof of the judgment they passed. It was practically a sacred obligation, showing the weighing before the killing. He played her the footage, her brother's truck, her brother's hands on the wheel, the eagle falling from the sky with buckshot in its wings, the bear cubs crying over their mother's body while 3 men laughed and reloaded. Maren watched all of it without blinking, and when it was over she was crying, and she was furious. And underneath both of those things, in a place she would spend a long time not examining too closely, she understood. She didn't forgive him, not exactly. But she stopped hunting him. It is a strange thing, to fall for a creature that could end you between one heartbeat and the next. Maren would think about that later, in the quiet hours. How love had crept up on her, not despite the danger, but almost because of it. Because Vahnrik was the first thing in her adult life that had ever made her feel small and unbreakable at the same time. She learned his real face on a night in early October, when the first frost silvered the grass and he finally, after months of careful distance, reached up and unlatched the mask that had hidden his features since the day he landed. What lay beneath was not human, would never be mistaken for human. Mottled amber-gray skin, mandibled jaw, eyes like dark honey lit from within. And Maren, who had spent her whole life reading the emotional weather of animals for a living, looked at that face and saw unmistakably uncertainty. He was afraid of what she'd think. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Neither are you," he answered. And for the first time since she'd known him, the translator's flat, formal tone couldn't quite scrub the rawness out of what he meant. His people did not fall in love. That was not a category of experience the Kael'Vahn had a word for, because it was not a category of experience they were supposed to have. Hunters bonded to the hunt, to their honor, to the long lineage of blades passed down through their clans. Never to prey, never to the soft, short-lived creatures of worlds they visited only to judge and leave. Vahnrik had killed things that loved each other 1,000 times over and never once understood, until Maren Colton sat across a campfire from him with frost in her hair, and did not flinch when he told her, haltingly in a language stitched together from her radio and her own patient corrections, that he did not want to leave. "Then don't," she said. "It should not have been that simple." It was, anyway. He stripped his ship for parts and buried the wreckage deep enough that satellites wouldn't flag the metal signature, told himself it was practical concealment, and knew, underneath, that it was also a kind of promise. He built something like a home in the deep timber past the ridge. Not a house. Nothing so soft as that, but a shelter grown and shaped from materials Maren had no name for, warm in the winter, hidden from every eye but hers. By the time the snow came in earnest, 3 others of his kind had arrived, not summoned, not called, but drawn the way Kael'Vahn hunters were sometimes drawn to a scarth, who had gone unusually quiet on the long-range channels, curious what had kept him. They came expecting a warrior gone soft and found instead something that unsettled and moved them in equal measure. A hunter who had stopped hunting, who spent his days instead helping a human woman with graying fur on her mother's dog and learning, slowly, clumsily, to laugh in a language that wasn't his own. One by one, they too found reasons to stay. A small clan grew in the hidden places of Cutter's Ridge. 4 hunters, and, at its warm and unlikely center, 1 human woman who had come looking for her brother's killer, and found instead a family. Ashwood Hollow, meanwhile, went quiet. The disappearances stopped. The town told itself the trouble had moved on, the way small towns always do when the truth is too large to hold. Only Maren knew the truth was still there, hidden in the trees, choosing every day not to be what it had once been. For a while, nearly 2 years, it was enough. The Kael'Vahn believed their kind's greatest gift to the smaller races was their absence. The fact that a world, once judged and found unworthy of further attention, was left alone. What none of them counted on was that human beings, for all their softness, were relentless in their own quiet way, and Earth's governments had not remained blind to 2 years of strange metallic signatures, unexplained energy readings, and a small, isolated Montana county with a suspiciously plummeted violent crime rate, and an equally suspicious string of unsolved disappearances that had come before it. The agency that finally found them called itself, with the flat, unimaginative honesty of every intelligence bureau in history, the Division of Anomalous Contact, DAC, to the people who worked there, though most of them privately called it something less polite. Its director, a sharp, tired woman named Renata Okafor, had spent 14 months piecing together satellite anomalies, radio silence, and a buried impact crater the size of a house, and on a gray morning in late November, she led a team of 11 scientists and 20 armed federal agents up the same logging roads Maren had once walked alone. They did not come to make peace. They came to collect. Somewhere in a research facility outside Colorado Springs, there were people who dreamed of alien tissue samples the way other men dreamed of gold. Genetic material, blood chemistry, the biological blueprint of a species capable of technology that made Earth's best engineers weep with envy. Okafor's orders were explicit: contain, sedate, collect. Lethal force only if containment failed. Vahnrik felt them coming before Maren did. Felt the wrongness of engines that didn't belong in his forest. Smelled fear and gun oil and human adrenaline on the wind 3 miles before the first perimeter team crossed the ridgeline. He stood in the doorway of the shelter he'd built with his own hands, watching the tree line, and understood with a hunter's absolute clarity that everything he had built here was about to be tested. "They'll take you apart," Maren said, standing beside him, her voice steady in a way that cost her everything to manage. "Piece by piece in a lab, and they will tell themselves it's science." "They will try," Vahnrik said. The battle that followed was short, brutal, and entirely one-sided in ways that horrified even Okafor, who had read every file the government had on this creature and still hadn't fully believed them. Vahnrik and his 3 clan brothers moved through the strike team like something out of the oldest human nightmares, and within 11 minutes, 4 federal agents were dead, 6 more were wounded, and the rest were in full retreat down the mountain, radioing for an evacuation and reinforcements in voices that cracked with something close to religious terror. It was not a victory. Vahnrik knew that even as the last agent fled, his people had a rule older than any individual hunter's pride. A Scarth exposed was a Scarth who brought his enemies back in greater numbers, and greater numbers were coming. Worse, far worse in the eyes of his own people, though he did not let himself think of that yet. He had just done something his kind considered nearly unthinkable. He had fought, openly and without subtlety, to protect something soft, something prey. He made his choice standing over the ruin of the ambush, blood, not his own, cooling in the snow, Maren's hand gripping his forearm hard enough to bruise. He triggered the beacon. It was a small thing physically, a shard of dark crystal buried in the collar of his armor, the kind every Kael'Vahn hunter carried, and almost none of them ever used. It was a distress signal, an admission of danger too large for a lone hunter to handle alone, and activating it after this long, after nearly 2 full cycles of complete silence, no reports, no trophies sent home, nothing but a slowly cooling trail that his own convocation had likely already marked as presumed dead, was itself a violation. Hunters who went dark that long and then reappeared did not simply resume their old lives. They answered for the silence. Vahnrik knew that. He triggered the beacon anyway because Okafor's reinforcements were already inbound, because whatever came for him from the stars would come faster and hit harder than whatever the United States government could muster in a Montana winter. And because, though it was not a reason his training had any category for, he was not going to let them take Maren apart in a lab to study what made her brave. The response came faster than even Vahnrik expected, faster than was strictly comfortable, in fact, which told him something about how closely his long silence had already been watched. Less than 11 hours after the beacon fired, the sky above Cutter's Ridge tore open a second time, and where a single small craft had once fallen, now a vessel the size of a cathedral settled soundlessly into the clearing behind the buried wreckage of Vahnrik's first ship, its hull the color of a starless night, humming with a low, bone-deep frequency that made every animal for 10 miles flee in the opposite direction. Okafor's second wave, 60 agents, 3 military helicopters, and enough equipment to field strip a small alien spacecraft, arrived at the tree line 40 minutes later and found nothing but scorched earth, 4 sets of enormous footprints leading toward a crater already empty, and a Montana winter sky swallowing the last echo of engines no human alloy had ever produced. Vahnrik had made his choice in the ship's boarding corridor, with 3 armed clan brothers at his back and a rescue crew that had not expected, had not been told, that the long silent Scarth they'd come to retrieve would arrive carrying a human female by the hand. "She comes with me," he said, in the layered, clicking language of his own people, and the rescue captain, an older hunter named Threxus, whose face carried the pale scarring of 100 worthy kills, looked at Maren the way a man might look at a bomb someone had brought aboard his ship without warning, and said nothing at all because there was in that moment nothing in the Kael'Vahn code that told him what he was supposed to say. They lifted off into a black sky already streaked with dawn, and Ashwood Hollow, Montana, shrank beneath them into a smudge of white and green, and then into nothing. And Maren Colton, 28 years old, a wildlife biologist who had once tracked cougars for a living, and had somehow ended up falling in love with something that fell from the stars, pressed her face to a viewport made of a material Earth had no name for, and watched her entire world become a single blue marble and then a point of light, and then finally, nothing at all. She did not cry. She had done all her crying for this life already, months ago, in a silo that smelled of copper and old hay. What she felt now, watching Earth disappear, was something stranger and quieter. Grief, yes, but underneath it, unmistakably, the calm of someone who had already chosen and chosen again, and was not going to stop choosing now. Vahnrik's clawed hand found hers in the dark of the corridor, and he did not let go for the rest of the journey. Threxus Prime, Homeworld of the Kael'Vahn was not what Maren had imagined in her wilder moments of speculation. She had pictured, absurdly, something like the surface of Mars, red and barren and hostile. What she found instead, when the ship finally broke atmosphere 3 weeks later, was a world of vast black forests taller than any redwood, cities carved into cliff faces rather than built upon open ground, and a sky the deep bruised purple of a permanent dusk. It was, in its own alien way, beautiful. It was also, unmistakably, a world built by and for hunters, every structure angled like a blade, every open space a killing ground disguised as architecture. The reception they received was not the one Vahnrik had hoped for, though it was perhaps the one he should have expected. Word of a Scarth returned from the dead, and returned with prey, no less. Prey he had not killed but bonded to, had outraced their ship by days. By the time they touched down at the hall of the Ninth Circuit, a crowd of hunters had already gathered in the black stone plaza outside, not to celebrate a lost brother's return, but to witness, with the same grim fascination humans might bring to a car crash, whatever judgment the convocation would pass on him. The convocation of blades was not a court in any sense Maren's earth-trained mind fully recognized. No juries, no lawyers, no presumption of innocence. It was 7 elder hunters, each of them carrying the scars and trophies of centuries, seated in a black stone amphitheater beneath a ceiling open to the darkening sky. And its purpose was not to determine guilt, but simply to weigh what was already known and decide what it deserved. Vahnrik stood at its center, unarmored for the first time Maren had ever seen, his true face bare to his own people's judgment. And beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, refusing every quiet suggestion from HFY that she weighed elsewhere, stood Maren Colton, the only human being who had ever set foot on Threxus Prime. The charges, when the eldest of the 7 finally spoke them aloud in a voice like stone grinding on stone, were exactly as simple and exactly as damning as Vahnrik had known they would be. Silence beyond the 6th cycle, unreported and unexplained, a violation of the hunter's bond to kin, union with prey unworthy of the blade, a violation older than any law written, older than the convocation itself, intimacy with a lesser species, a corruption the Kael'Vahn had not tolerated since the earliest wars that had made them who they were. Each charge landed in the silent amphitheater like a dropped stone into still water, and Maren, who did not understand every word of the layered language being spoken but understood perfectly the shape of what was happening, felt Vahnrik's hand find hers again, hidden between their bodies, hidden from the convocation's sight but not, she suspected, from its notice. He did not deny any of it. That, more than anything else, seemed to unsettle the elders. A hunter who had broken nearly every sacred law of his people and stood before them not with excuses but with something disturbingly close to peace. "I do not ask forgiveness," Vahnrik said, when at last it was his turn to speak, and his voice, even filtered through Maren's small translator, even in a language built for war rather than confession, carried a weight that silenced even the murmuring crowd beyond the amphitheater's edge. "I ask only that you understand what you are judging. I did not choose to fall silent out of cowardice. I did not choose her out of weakness. I chose to protect what was worthy of protection, and I have never, in all my cycles as a Scarth, been more certain that a kill was deserved, or more certain that a life was not." He turned then, and looked at Maren, and for one unguarded moment his translator caught something the formal convocation speech had not been built to carry, something closer to tenderness than his own language had ever needed a word for. "If that is a crime," he said, "then I have committed it gladly, and I would commit it again." The eldest of the 7, a hunter so ancient her armor had fused nearly seamless with the scarred flesh beneath it, a hunter whose name even Vahnrik's people spoke with a kind of reverent unease, rose from her seat, and the plaza beyond the amphitheater fell utterly, completely silent. "The law is not decided by feeling," she said. "It is decided by what a species must be to survive what it is. We do not hunt because we hate the weak, Scarth Vahnrik. We hunt because a people who cannot judge, cannot last. A hunter who bonds to prey is a hunter who has stopped being a blade, and a blade that will not cut is no longer a blade at all." She looked then at Maren, the first time since their arrival that any of the 7 elders had turned their full attention to her directly. And something in that gaze was not cruelty, was not even coldness, but something worse, a kind of sorrowful absolute certainty. "You are not condemned for what you are, small one," the eldest said, and Maren, understanding every word this time, felt the floor of the world tilt beneath her. "You are condemned for what he became, standing beside you. That is not a lesser crime. It is, perhaps, the greater one." The verdict, when it came without ceremony, without cruelty, without anything that Maren's earth-trained heart could recognize as anger. Only the flat, absolute weight of a law 700 generations old, spoken by a species that had never once, in all that time, made an exception for love. "Death," the eldest said, "for the Scarth Vahnrik, who broke the bond of kin and chose prey over blade. Death for the human female, whose presence made a hunter forget what he was made for. Sentenced to be carried out at the rising of the second moon, 3 cycles from this hour. They were given a cell that was not truly a cell. A bare stone chamber high in the hall of the 9th Circuit, its single window open to the vast dusk purple sky, because the Kael'Vahn did not believe in denying the condemned one last look at the world before it ended. It was, Maren thought, a strange kind of mercy from a people who had none to spare in every other sense. She did not cry even now. She had thought she might, had braced herself for it on the long walk up from the amphitheater, guarded on both sides by hunters who would not meet her eyes. But what she felt, sitting beside Vahnrik in the fading purple light with 3 cycles left to live, was not fear so much as a strange, fierce clarity. "I don't regret it," she said. "Any of it. I want you to know that." "Nor I," Vahnrik answered. And his hand, when it found hers this time, did not hide itself from anything. Not the guards outside, not the darkening sky, not the law that had already decided what came next. In all my cycles, I killed 100 things and called it purpose. I did not understand purpose until I stopped killing and started staying. Outside their window, the second moon was already rising, pale and patient, 3 days from full. Maren thought of Ashwood Hollow, of pine trees and cold mountain air, and a brother she had buried without ever quite forgiving, and a life she had walked away from without a single backward glance, because she had found something in the deep timber of Cutter's Ridge worth more than any life she'd have lived without it. She thought of the strange, warm, unlikely family that had grown up around them in that hidden shelter in the snow. Hunters who had learned, slowly, to laugh in a language not their own. She did not know, in that quiet stone room with the moon rising and the hours already counting down, that far below in the black plaza, Threxus, the old scarred captain who had said nothing at all when Vahnrik carried a human aboard his ship, was already moving through the crowd of watching hunters, speaking in low, urgent tones to elders who had not spoken in the amphitheater, hunters who had heard Vahnrik's words and felt something shift, uneasy and unfamiliar, in laws they had never once questioned in 700 generations. She did not know that the story of the Scarth who chose love over the blade, and the human who had made him choose it, was already spreading. Through the black stone cities, through the deep forests, through channels that reached far beyond the reach of any single convocation, carried by hunters who found themselves for the first time in their long, violent history, uncertain whether the law they had always trusted was still the law they wanted to keep. She knew only this, that with 3 days left before the rising of the second moon, she was not afraid, and she was not alone, and whatever came next, mercy or the blade, she would face it exactly where she had chosen to be. Beside him.